Entering service in 1938, the Westland Lysander was initially used in the Army cooperation role, providing artillery spotting, reconnaissance and light bombing duties. Despite some initial success in the early stages of the Second World War, the Army quickly determined that the aircraft was unsuitable for this role, being too fast for artillery spotting, too slow to evade enemy fighters, and too big and heavy to conceal on the ground. It was replaced in this cooperation duty by aircraft such as the Tomahawk and Mustang as the war progressed, but due to the excellent short takeoff and landing qualities of the Lysander, it found a use with special operations, earning a place in military history for being the aircraft that could deploy and extract agents from occupied countries during clandestine activities. Hey guys, Matt from Model Minutes here, and today I'm going to be building this Airfix Westland Lysander in 1/72 scale. As always, before I get started, please remember that adult supervision may be required when building model kits. This is due to the use of sharp tools and toxic paints and chemicals. Airfix recommends this kit to those aged 8 years and older. So, without any further ado, let's get into it. I originally bought this back in 2008, which is the year this particular version was released. Back then I was going to paint it in the Special Operations paint scheme and had already given a coat of paint to many of the parts. I can't wholeheartedly remember why I didn't build the kit, but on closer inspection I seem to be missing the ladder and agent figure for that particular version, so perhaps that's why. Either way, the first thing I need to do is remove all the black paint, or at least as much as I can. I'm using isopropyl alcohol to do this, and for more information on how to strip paint from your models, you'll be able to find a tutorial on this subject on my channel. I popped the parts in their bath of IPA for about 20 minutes. Whilst the parts are soaking, let's take a look at the other elements of the kit. The box is to the style that was used at the time, with this rather attractive image of the Lysander on the front. One edge of the box features a brief history of the real Lysander, a list of recommended paints from the Humbrol range, the dimensions of the kit, and one Airfix flying hour. I'll make sure to cut that out later. The other long edge has the familiar safety information in multiple languages. The short edges of the box has the same image as on the front, and it allows you to identify the kit whilst it's on the shelf, but here it also indicates that it has a skill level of 2, so it may present a few challenges, but it shouldn't be too difficult to build. Inside the box, most of the parts have come away from the sprue due to my attempt to build this in my earlier years. Generally, the mould quality is okay, but there is some flash in places. The pilot and gunner figures are not bad, but I did notice that one was considerably smaller than the other. I'm guessing the smaller chap is the gunner, so that he fits in the confined space at the rear of the cockpit. The detail on this kit is primarily of the raised variety, not much in the way of recessed panel lines on this one. Also, as can be seen on the engine component, it's not particularly well detailed, with many parts having a representation of what they are supposed to be, but that's pretty much it. My decal sheet seems to have survived quite well over the last 12 years. I am missing the roundels as I've already applied them, but those will get destroyed during the paint stripping process. As a result, I looked on eBay and managed to get a spare set for £2. These ones, although complete, seem to have yellowed ever so slightly more than mine. At least now I can pick which ones I use. The print quality on these sheets is not great, but let's face it, that's not really a surprise. There are some registry issues where the colours don't line up quite as well as they should, and if you look closely, the colours are a little pixelated. The instructions are to a familiar format from Airfix, with multilingual information about the real Lysander on the first page and some guidance on the second. We then enter the build steps, and although they are relatively well spread out, with some easy to follow pictures, they do miss out a few little details here and there. For example, the little wings on the landing gear need their slots cut out, but that's not mentioned in the instructions. The painting and decal schemes include one for a Lysander Mk.II, used in Army cooperation role in 1939, which is what I'm going to do. The other is for a Lysander used in special duties in 1944. Although there aren't many colours being used in these schemes, the black and white nature of these pictures means that confusion could occur when trying to pick out the right paints. Enough of that, let's see how the parts are coming along. Having removed as much paint as I can, I'm now at a stage where I'm ready to begin assembly of the model. As I mentioned in my tutorial on paint stripping, the wings must have had a spray paint which reacted with the plastic, as the IPA didn't really touch that. So instead I used my rotary tool to remove as much of that as I could. The first part of this build is to cut away the cockpit bulkheads and clean them up. The pilot and gunner's chairs can now be cemented into their slots on these parts. I'm using Revell contactor cement here to get accurate placement of the glue. I then cement the bulkheads into one half of the fuselage and check the fit by placing the other half over the top. I won't cement this bit on just yet though. The mount for the rear facing machine gun is also cemented into its hole in the fuselage, and again I checked the fit to make sure it would line up. I sprayed the interior areas with Humbrol 78 Cockpit Green matte acrylic paint, which I have thinned with water to get it to flow through my airbrush. I have decided to airbrush this kit to get some more practice in using this particular kind of tool. As always, please use the correct protective equipment and environment when doing this kind of activity. A few thin layers would be needed to get a good uniform colour. Now I can join the two fuselage halves together, which fit surprisingly well. The horizontal tail surfaces are then cemented into their slots on the tail of the model. As there are no cockpit details at all, I thought I would hide this fact by adding the two figures. I stuck them on a stick with some sticky tack and then began painting by picking out the face in Humbrol 61 matte flesh. 96 RAF blue matte enamel was next to be used, and I did this on their uniforms. Humbrol 29 dark earth was painted onto their boots and flying helmets. I then painted 26 matte khaki onto their gloves. 24 matte trainer yellow was brushed onto their life vests. And finally, Humbrol 33 matte black was used to pick out their goggles. With that done, I used my homemade black enamel wash to blend it all together and bring out some of the recessed details. For more information on how I make this wash, you can find a tutorial on that on my channel. And the figures are now done, ready to be added to the plane. They were carefully cemented into their respective seats inside the aircraft. This was then followed by the rear-facing machine gun, which I have already painted with Humbrol 53 gunmetal grey. Before I move on, I'm going to do some painting. Rather than load up my airbrush with silver paint, I'm going to use this cheap can that I already had in my paint supplies. I sprayed this onto the wheels and lower edges of the wings. I then masked all the clear parts. This was a bit of a hassle. There are so many small clear parts that have so many frames on them. This took the better part of an hour, but it was quite satisfying when it was done. I used Tamiya masking tape to do this, sticking it onto the part and then cutting it next to the frames. I glued the clear parts onto the model using PVA. This will dry strong and clear, so it's ideal for doing this kind of thing. There are two small windows at the rear of the fuselage, and they were added in the exact same way and would be masked as well. Here is one of the landing gear leg halves. I've already cut out the slot for those little wings that get attached to them. I repeated the process for the other leg using a sharp knife and cutting from the inside. This was somewhat fiddly and I had to be careful not to cut myself. Each leg comes in two halves which sandwich a wheel. If you do this right, the wheels shouldn't be glued in place and would be free to rotate. This adds an element of play value, but I'm not really fussed about that. The assembled legs can then be glued into their holes in the lower sides of the fuselage. The little wings are then added into their slots. You might have to hold them in place until the glue cures though, as they will want to droop down over time due to gravity. I've added a little masking tape to the lower side of the wing here, as I thought it would be easier to do that before it was added to the model. The wing support struts are then cemented into their holes. The wing can then be slotted onto the clear part at the top of the canopy, and the support strut is slotted into a groove in the landing gear leg. This is another fiddly step to get all those parts lined up. With that done, the landing lights needed to be added to the front of the landing gear. I should have really done this before cementing the landing gear together, but it won't be too much of a problem. The problem I do have is that there is only one clear light in the kit. I must have lost the other one years ago. To fix this problem, I used some sticky tack to make a little mould using the light I still had, and I then dropped some hot glue from a glue gun into this mould and left it to dry. I removed the glue and cleaned it up. Now I have a reasonable representation of a landing light. These were both then glued into their holes in the front of the wheels. Now it's time to get some major painting done. I've masked the lower wing and tail surfaces, which are already painted silver from earlier. I sprayed the outsides of the landing gear with Humbrol 24 mixed with a little Vallejo buff acrylic. When this area is dry, I will mask a stripe along each wheel as indicated on the instructions. I also used this paint to spray the spinner for the propeller. With that now done, the upper surfaces are being sprayed with Humbrol 29 dark earth acrylic, which I have thinned with some water to improve the flow. A few coats would be needed to get a uniform finish. Next, I masked the camouflage scheme using masking tape. I then sprayed the model again, but this time using Humbrol 30 dark green. The camouflage scheme wraps all the way round the fuselage, so I had to take care here to get the paint in all those difficult to reach places. Now it's time to remove the masking tape. And it's done a terrible job. I guess that's what you get when you use cheap masking tape. The paint has bled underneath it and mixed into the other areas. Oh well, I guess I'll try to fix this using some thinned down 29 dark earth to go back over these areas and hide the mistakes. Saying that though, I think I did an alright job of fixing it. Now it's time to clear coat the model with this K Colors gloss. This is an airbrush ready acrylic paint and it goes onto the model really well. A number of thin even layers result in a uniform gloss finish. This will form the base for my application of the decals. Speaking of the decals, I identified the ones I needed for my scheme and then cut them from the sheet. I soaked them in warm water to release them from the backing paper. I'm using the Microset and Microsol products from Microscale as my decal solutions in this build. I prepare the areas the transfers are going to go by brushing on some Microset. Then I apply the transfer, make sure it's in the correct position, then Microsol is brushed on top. This two-step method will help to soften the decals into the surface details and make them look as though they are painted on. I can repeat the application of Microsol if I need the transfer to soften even more. I'm hoping that the gloss layer will prevent these decals from silvering, but I guess I will have to wait and see when they have dried. Humbrol 53 Gunmetal Grey was thinned with Tamiya acrylic thinners X20A at roughly equal parts. I then applied this paint to the engine component. Humbrol 85 Satin Coal Black acrylic was also thinned, then this was brushed onto the blades of the propeller. With the decals now cured, a further coat of K Colors gloss varnish was applied to protect the decals. And with that paint now dry, I brushed on more of my homemade enamel wash into the recessed areas of the model. Due to the texture left over from where I used my wire brush on the wings, some of it has streaked into these areas, but that's not really a problem as I removed the excess wash with a cotton bud dipped in white spirit. Humbrol 49 matte varnish acrylic was thinned down with hot water to prevent it from leaving white residue as it dried. This was then sprayed over the model to dull down the gloss finish. Something I forgot to mention earlier is that the engine cowling has just been pressed onto the model this whole time. I can't add the engine and propeller otherwise, and to get a continuous camouflage scheme I thought this would be the best way of doing it. The engine component is cemented into the cowling by inserting from the rear. It has a little locating marker that it has to line up with. I can then push the retaining pin through the engine, cement the prop onto it, and then finally top it off with the yellow spinner. If you get that right, the propeller should freely rotate. Next, I masked a ring around the cowling and carefully painted this area with a blend of Humbrol 53 gunmetal grey and 171 antique bronze, at a ratio of about 75% gunmetal to 25% bronze. This was also thinned with a little Tamiya thinner to help it flow. In hindsight, I should have painted this before adding the propeller to make it a little easier. I then removed the tape and finished off painting the engine exhaust pipe with the same colour. The tips of the propeller blades were picked out in Humbrol 24 matte trainee yellow. The engine assembly can now be cemented onto the nose of the model. I carefully painted the tail wheel with Humbrol 33 matte black. The silver was sprayed much earlier when I did the lower wings. I then cemented it into place along with the probe which fits into the hole under the wing. You'll be able to note that I've already painted the tyres on the main wheels with Humbrol 33 matte black and 11 silver on the inside, cleaning up any overspray. I also used the silver paint to highlight the landing gear lights. The canopy mask is now carefully removed using the tip of my knife. My build of the Airfix Westland Lysander in 1/72nd scale is now complete. I didn't go over the top with weathering this one, as I thought that a pre-war aircraft would have had better care taken of it. The aircraft I have depicted here is that of a Lysander Mk.II of No. 4 Army Cooperation Squadron based at RAF Odium in 1939. So, what did I think of this build? Well, it will be slightly different to my normal builds, as I can't wholeheartedly review this kit in my normal way, given that I had already messed about with it and it wasn't exactly in a new condition. But that being said, the fit of the parts was generally good. Surprisingly so, given the age of the tooling. The paints I used were okay for the most part, but I'm quickly learning that the Humbrol acrylic paints don't really airbrush too well, so should really look for something a little bit more suitable. The details on the outside of the model are okay, yet I can't speak for the accuracy of the kit compared to the real thing, but overall it looks like a Lysander to me. It is let down by the absolute lack of any cockpit detail though, which you would have thought would be included, seeing as there is all that cockpit glass to look through. The instructions were okay, little vague in places, but nothing that couldn't be overcome. Being printed in black and white was annoying though, particularly when looking at the painting instructions, but I guess that's what they were like back then. I do particularly like the box artwork though. Seeing as this was the era when I first got into modelling, it does hit me with a bit of nostalgia. The decals though, not a fan. I'm so glad Airfix has moved away from these and got them made by Cartograph now. The printing wasn't amazing and they were quite papery and didn't really apply to the model too well. Despite my gloss coat and repeated layers of micro sol and set, I still got a bit of silvering in places. So yeah, I'm going to put that down to the age of the transfers. Back in 2008, when I bought this kit, it cost me the sum total of £5 here in the UK. With inflation today, that would be closer to £7, which seems about right and would bring it in line with other kits in the Airfix range, particularly those in the Vintage Classic series. And I would be surprised if this one didn't make an appearance in that range over the next few years. The kit was originally tooled back in 1973, so the raised panel lines and lack of detail is pretty much a product of that time. It was released a number of times between then and 2008, but sadly it is yet to make a reappearance, so if you did want one of these for yourself, you would probably be looking at the second-hand market. On a related note, I know that Matchbox released their own version of the 1/72nd scale Lysander in 1972, and from what I understand it might be slightly better detailed. It did enter the Revell range in 2008 briefly, but again, you'll be looking on the second-hand market for that one as well. It would be interesting to get one to draw a comparison with. But anyway, I think it's probably time to wrap this one up. Despite having sat in the box in pieces for the last 12 years, I think I've managed to do a reasonable job of finishing this kit. Yes, it did have its issues, but generally it was fun to build and only took a couple of days. Ultimately, I'm pretty glad that after all this time, I finally managed to do it a bit of justice and add it to my collection. Let me know what you think of my model in the comments below, and feel free to leave any suggestions for video builds you might like to see too. Subscribe with notifications on to see more modelling content, and click that like button if you enjoyed the video. Massive thanks to my patrons over on Patreon. It's due to the contribution of people like this that I can keep making new videos. I'll probably be buying some airbrush ready paints with their donations, so if you want to join this community, take a look at the link in the description. Whilst you're in the description box, you'll find links to my social media. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter and Discord. All that's left to say is a massive thank you to you for watching this one, and I'll see you on the workbench next time.